I built the perfect plan. It still felt like quitting. The lie in my head was louder than the work. I was getting things done, but I felt totally lost. The problem isn't the map. It's the heavy backpack that I'm carrying. Forget the perfect plan. Time to count your wins. Today, we learned the only rule that counts. The showing up score. Stick around.
They said it was too late, that the best years were behind him. But he wasn't done. He was just getting dangerous. This podcast isn't for the overnight success stories. It's for the ones who are still in the middle of the damn fight. The late bloomers, the blue-collar visionaries, the people who refuse to settle. This isn't a comeback. It's a fucking uprising.
Hey, welcome back, everyone, to Electrician to Entrepreneur. 10th episode. And it's 10 straight episodes. We were consistent on this, and I figured we'd take a moment to start this episode by looking back just a little bit on our successes over the last 10 weeks. We'll start by, bringing you back to episode 1, in which I discussed with you, of course, the 90-day exit plan, which was the 90-day plan that grew into a get out of my W-2 job by January 1st. And we're still working on that plan. We haven't given up on it, but it's certainly getting to be more difficult. And we've learned a lot of things along the way. And a lot of those things, I believe I have been doing a pretty good job of sharing that with you over these last 10 weeks. But, it's not about the amount of time. It's about the stacking the wins. It's about showing up every day. And this really ties us right into what this episode is about. But before we get into that, let's look at where we've succeeded. We've succeeded in setting up some really good habits. I'm up every morning at 5 o'clock, no later than 5:30 from particularly exhaustive night. And, and so every morning between 5:30, get up, make my coffee and go through my rituals and we're doing that consistently. This is something that I didn't have in my life before, which was a consistent morning routine. About the closest I had to a consistent morning routine, which I'm sure most electricians understand, is getting up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, getting in the shower, and some not even getting in the shower, getting in the truck and going. And that's not, that's a completely different thing. And it's not really a routine. It's just going to work. And so setting up successful habits is a big part of entrepreneurial success. So we've succeeded in doing all those things. In addition to doing all those things, I've set up the LLC for my first company. And we are 1/3 of the way through creating the product. I have a mentor who I probably don't talk to enough, which I hope to rectify this week. And we've consistently showed up every day to do something, even if it didn't amount to much of anything. And we've consistently showed up every week to do the podcast, even if it was a day or two late. We're still doing the podcast every week. And for anybody that's looking for that Monday morning release or Sunday night release every week, I apologize that we haven't always hit that mark, but at least I can count my win as still producing at least one episode a week. So that being said, despite all of the progress that we've made so far, the internal fight is the hardest part. And it's the internal fight, the internal conflicts that you can win that are really the biggest wins. The it's actually quite comical and ironic. But the closer you get, the louder the voice of self doubt is. I have what I refer to myself as, you know, 50 years of being an escape artist, and we're going to get into that a little bit more as we continue through the episode. So the paradox of the working system and the foundational principle that solves it, which is the showing up metric. So now, last week, we talked about setting up the pillars. We're doing pretty good on holding up these pillars. We're showing up every day. Um, we're putting in effort. Um, I'm showing. I've got my time blocks. I obey my time blocks as much as I can. I put I try to keep my focus where I need to keep my focus. Certainly, physical ailments do get in the way. It's going to be an ongoing challenge, and I'm going to have to fight through that for a long time. But there's a deep seated reoccurring thought pattern, and it's a combination of how much work I put in and the inclusion of is it good enough, or is it perfect? And when you're constantly measuring against how much work you've put in every day, and you're constantly measuring against whether or not it's good enough, you have a system that is doomed to fail. Perfectionism is something that, of course, you can work towards, but it can't be the measure in which you measure your success. Perfectionism can come over time, and it can come after you have found success. You don't need perfectionism to be successful. And in fact, if you're searching for perfectionism, and I believe I dedicated an episode towards this, but if you're waiting for things to be perfect, then you're never going to get off the chair, and you're never going to go out that door. And so it's an incredibly hard thing to give up when you spend your whole life, 50 years, mind you, you spend that whole 50 years aimed at results, not, just the showing up, not measuring the small wins, but rather measuring the large win as a whole. In reality, as an electrician, and I'm sure plenty of tradesmen understand this, we show up, we put the work in, and we get it done. We're expected to have a certain amount of work done by a certain amount of time. We're expected to have, we follow schedules, and we look for perfectionism in certain things. I mean, certainly you can let go of some things. Is it safe, and does it meet the code? I've heard that a couple of times in my career. But, at the end of the day, there's also this consideration for how fast you can get something done, because this is where you make your money, is on the speed. And that may be true in the contracting world, but in the entrepreneurial space, it's not. This is a time measured industry. It's how much time you put in, not how fast can you get it done, or how much you've done today. Truth of the matter is that, and this is where we slip back, and it happens over and over and over. And I spent the crux of this previous week saying to myself, I can do more. I should be able to do more. Even though my body was screaming at me to stop. And, and now, you know, when you've developed a work ethic for producing results, in short time frames, and you're looking more at how much you've put in a day rather than how far you've come over the last, X amount of time, instead of looking at what you've succeeded at, but looking rather at what you can get done, where you should be. You spend all that time, all of your life preparing for that, then you tend to ignore fatigue, you tend to ignore the pains, you tend to ignore all those things. And it's not, especially as you get older, it's not good for you. You have to listen to your body. When your body is screaming to stop, you have to stop, or you have to pause. I shouldn't say you don't have to stop, but you have to pause and you have to take stock of where you're at. And there's no shame in that. There's there's no winning formula. Everybody at all those marketing ads, we can show you a system that's going to make you rich overnight, and so on and so forth. It's bullshit. There is no winning formula. Nobody has a winning formula. How do you invest in real estate and make millions and millions and millions of dollars with next to nothing? Bullshit. Read those books, sure. Learn a thing or two. Understand that the system is designed for a specific person. The one that wrote the book. Everyone that tells you that their way is the only way and their way is the way that's going to make you rich. Let me tell you, I'm gonna spoiler alert. They designed that system for themselves, and it works for them because it's their system. So there's no formula to winning. So and this is where the drama comes. You begin to you begin to feel that the things that you're looking to get done don't get done. Every day you're expecting to have a certain amount of result, you don't, and it adds up. You're looking for that tangible progress every day, and it adds up because it feels like failure, and it becomes a heavy, heavy, heavy load. And, and so now when I refer to myself as, having 50 years of an escape artist, persona is, I drank heavily for many, many years. I've I've spent weeks and weeks and weeks where just getting out of bed was a struggle. There was a time in my life I spent 3 years, um, really just not doing anything. And actually back in those days, I escape into video games, and all these things. And it's easy when you can give up drinking and drugs and all that stuff and easily have that entire addiction replaced with doom scrolling. You can have weeks, you can replace these addictions with doom scrolling or, you know, just Facebook, whatever. It's just another addiction, right? And I'm sure that's all anybody ever talks about nowadays is, how much time you're spending on the screen. But let me tell you something, so all those things, it's so you can see that it would be very easy for me to sit here and look at the progress and say that, it wasn't enough. It's not enough. I should have more. I should have more. I should have more. I should have more. And this is where principle comes in. This is where we don't measure by what we have accumulated, but rather by how much we've shown up. It's the law of the only win. Success is not measured by the outcome, that is the grind. It is measured by the daily adherence to show up. The ultimate anti-failure mechanism is the commitment to do something every day, regardless of mood or feeling, regardless of being tired, of being mentally exhausted. Show up and you do something. Something. You know, all these young guys, young entrepreneurs talking about being up until, midnight and then waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning to start all over again and doing nothing but grinding and grinding and grinding. It's great when you're 20 or 25 or 30 even. Let me tell you, after you've reached 40, these things get harder and harder. And I'll tell you, 50 is like, it was like a switch was turned, like somebody flipped the switch. And suddenly, yeah, pulling those all-nighters, it goes away. You can't do it. And so you don't, understand this. Here's another metric for you to look at is that most major startup or founders, most major founders of entrepreneurial businesses or startups are all over the age of 45. So it's great that 25 or 30-year-old who could spend 16 to 18 hours a day working on creating his business and then fails 5, 6, 7 times, that's great. He can do that. But most successful, majorly successful entrepreneurs through the last 50 years have all been over the age of 45. And I point that out to say that you don't have to grind 16 to 18 hours a day and accomplish all these things in that 16 to 18 hours. Instead, what I am telling you, and this has been my week. So I'm telling myself as much as I'm telling you. Understand that I'm not lecturing from a place of success. I'm lecturing from a place of I just learned these lessons, or I'm continuing to learn these lessons. See, I'm providing for you the fortune of seeing this information happen real time for you, so that maybe you can avoid some of the pain that I'm going through, or maybe you just know what to expect. It's not easy. Your brain is going to tell you that you're not doing enough. You spent 50 years or 45 years or 40 years learning how to, to work through the pain, to get all these things that you need to have all this. You need to have tangible evidence of success. And I'm telling you that you just need to show up. It's what we referred to last week as the millimeter win, and what we've been referring to over the last couple of weeks as millimeter win. It's you're showing up is a win. You showed up. Good. That's the first step to getting something done. And if you don't manage to accomplish much after showing up, you showed up. And why is all of this important? Because how we talk to ourselves is very important. If you're constantly beating yourself up because you're not doing enough, you're never going to get anything done. You're always going to be failing. We've talked about manifestation before and all those other things. It only works if you're good to yourself. We've talked about grace, and this is what I mean by grace. Now, it's easier said than done. Nobody is a bigger critic of you than you. I can sit here and point out all of your flaws, but I guarantee you know your flaws so much more better is so much better than I could ever even dream. I guarantee that you know so much more about what's wrong with you than all the people in the world that have ever come across you could ever point out in any circumstance, including your own mother. So that's why it's important to understand that millimeter win. So the mental load, that is to say, this perfectionist. We're going to start with talking about perfectionist, okay? The perfectionist creates a mental load, mental weight. And so the mental load that makes us tired is the constant evaluation of our effort, the grind, how much we've been able to get done. The goal of this principle, the anti-perfectionist anchor, okay? um, the goal of this principle, the second principle number 2, is the anti-perfectionist anchor. And so this is the mental load that makes us tired from the constant evaluation of our effort, the grind. And the goal behind this principle is to rest through presence. So how do you know? So now I gotta tell you, when I was 18, after graduating from high school, I took a lot of LSD. I was taking LSD pretty much throughout my senior year, and I took I took so much acid after graduation, and I was, I was actually living I was probably having the best time of my life. Oh my God, was I ruining brain cells? But yeah, I was having probably the best time of my life, and um, I had this moment of weakness after taking quite a bit of acid, in which, and shortly thereafter, a friend of mine handed me a book. And if you've never seen this book and you're not, you never really read into anything very spiritual of any kind, then this book is probably going to weird you out because it's not written in the typical sense of how a book should be written. But the name of the book is Be Here Now, and it's by Baba Ram Dass. Baba Ram Dass is the, um, I guess, the spiritual name for this a psychiatric researcher from the 50s and 60s. And he's actually one of the, um, he was actually one of the gentlemen to first come up with LSD, and produce it. And his experiment went from experimenting on, first animals and then people, to experimenting on himself. And he created what was referred to as the initial and the real acid test. And but he ended up going down an incredible spiritual journey, and through all of this, and he ended up writing this book. I saw an interview with him, and he's a very interesting guy. And as you can imagine, I mean, years and years and years of taking LSD and others, these heavy uh, hallucinogenic drugs. And at any rate, in this book, he refers to something referred to as the outer darkness. Now, the outer darkness is something I don't know where the origins of the outer darkness is, but he talks about this, which is the ego-driven state of it's it's the ego. Actually, I've got. Hang on, I have a wonderful. So outer darkness is it's that state where the ego is running the show completely, where you're identified entirely with your thoughts, your story, your suffering. You're aware enough to know something is wrong, that there's no peace, but you're trapped in the very mechanisms trying to escape. It's the place of maximum effort with minimum grace. You're working so hard to control, to understand, to fix, to become, that you're actually creating the prison you're trying to escape from. And now I read this when I was young, when I was very young, and when 18, um, and I spent probably the better part of my life after that, uh, consistently asking if that's where I'm living my life, is in this outer darkness. Actually, probably the moments throughout my life after reading that where I didn't question that is when I really didn't have any drive to be better or smarter or drive to really do anything, to go anywhere. I just simply gave in and allowed um, everything around me to just unfold. But the problem is that I played two different people. I play the role of two different people, and um, one was the escape artist, drinking, drugs, um, you know, video games, doom scrolling, anything and everything to avoid having the thoughts run around in my head about where I'm at. And then the other would be, the other part of me would be this massive driven guy to achieve and to be the best. So anyway, so we're going to get back to the outer darkness. So now we've defined what outer darkness is. The judgment of from principle two, the judgment, the constant evaluation of our effort is rooted in outer darkness. And it's the ego driven state of constantly asking, am I broken? Is this working? Why is this so hard? And the anti-perfectionist tool is you must establish one core thought to eliminate this load before starting any task. And that's the show up anchor. I've already shown up, so that's job one. What's next? What do I do now? What's now? What's the next thing I need to work on? And it's funny. So I don't know why this fucking particular note has anything to do with anything. I mean, it does and it doesn't. So, I tried to force the show copy notes and felt like fraud validated this principle. I felt like a fraud validating this principle. The fraud feeling is the sign you are replacing your heart with the grind. And that's a good point, is that as you may have guessed from watching or listening, I speak off the cuff. I don't read from a script. I create a bunch of notes. Sometimes I don't read them all the way through before I get and start recording. But I set up all these notes and then I read them as I'm recording, and I talk about shit and I just, whatever comes to mind, and I just let it go. And this is, and I produce 60 minutes of this drivel. and I'm shitting on it now while you guys are, while the one or two or three of you in the world that give a shit are listening to this. And the fact of the matter is, and which is, ironic. I want to probably hold on to the one, two, or three people that actually listen to this every week or from time to time. But in actuality, it's there's a truth. I have to speak from the heart. It has to come from here. And if my notes don't fit this, and this is why I don't know what the fuck has to do with anything, but it does, because this is, it's a matter of perfectionism. I spent a lot of time working on these notes back on Wednesday or Thursday, and I got them done. And then I went to record on Saturday, and I immediately shot myself down and said, fuck this. I need new notes, because I'm just not feeling it. And so then I spent time Sunday creating new notes. And, the notes just aren't making sense. They're not getting anywhere. I'm not getting anywhere. This sucks. And it's, so this is the perfectionism, right? This is needing it to be perfect. And it's, and realistically, I'm pushing to produce and not to use my own, to speak from my own heart. So how do you make that work? And, I was having a conversation with Julie this morning in which she talked about this a little bit after I had produced these notes that I just freaking shit on. And I'm taking back me shitting on them because this is good. It brings up a good story. But after I produced these notes, I felt so much better. These notes, and here's the story. I fought like hell so I I always produce my show notes using Gemini. Just ask me a bunch of questions. I'll answer those questions, having to do with this past week. And, this is the overall subject we're going to talk about, and blah, blah, blah. And it'll ask me some questions and then create some bullet points. And it's all based on my experience. And it's the whole idea is to create these guardrails, right? So if this is the road I'm going down, these are my guardrails. And while I'm talking to you, and, it's very easy for me, ADHD brain, right? It's very easy for me to go off that way, take a hard left turn. Meanwhile, I'm supposed to be talking to you like this. And so when I do that, and anybody that's ever known me for more than 5 minutes knows that I'll be on this, and this is exactly, this particular story is exactly it. But I'll go around this big giant circle, and I'll probably do two or three laps before I come back to this road. So creating these bullet points gives me these guardrails. I stay within this. And so even though I just went off on a tangent, but I pulled myself back in, that stayed within the guardrails because I have these bullet points to keep me on track. And so we spent a lot of time on this, over the last few days, really, trying to come up with show notes that felt genuine. And for some reason, I couldn't feel it. And like I said, when I talk, I have to feel it. And then it occurred to me late last night, and this is what I was telling Julie this morning. It occurred to me, one thing that I always seem to gravitate towards when I talk. I always sort of gravitate towards the lecture. There's a lesson in everything I say. Well, not everything. A lot of what I say is gibberish too. But, I'm a teacher, I think, deep down. And this is why I really kind of see the end of my life as, more of a motivational speaker than anything else, because I've always felt that, I've always kind of lived my life from a position of, I have so much to relay to you, so much to teach. And, and it's a funny thing because, and especially for anybody that knows me well, it's like, well, how do you know You haven't done any of that stuff. You haven't done this, you haven't done that. And so this is where the fraud comes in, right? But, in reality, when I became an electrician, and by my 3rd or 4th year, I was very good at showing other apprentices that which I had already learned, especially telling them to avoid certain journeymen or to act a certain way around certain journeymen so that, they wouldn't, they would have an easier time. Um, and by the time I had my license and I was running work and as a foreman, um, I spent a lot of time teaching apprentices, and the apprentices that didn't want to show that didn't want to learn were ones that suffered with me. And it's not that, not wanting to learn doesn't necessarily show itself in the, uh, I mean, certainly I've been that person that's like, yeah, I know, I already know. And you don't realize that you're coming from that place of I already know or whatever. But and if you've worked in the trades and you've had to teach people how to do stuff, you know what this looks like. Yep, 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 yep. Okay, yep, okay, yep. Just okay. Stop telling me what to do. I'm gonna go do it. Yeah, that's a kid that's not listening to you, right? We all know what that looks like. If you've ever spent any time teaching somebody how to do something, you know what that looks like. And that's exactly what it looks like. And there's others too. I mean, of course, there's the one that just stares at you blank. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. I had this one kid, he would smile at me, and you could see he's hanging on every word, but you can also see the wheels in the back of his head are just they're moving very slowly. He's not quite getting it. I mean, I love that kid because he was all heart. He just wanted to win so badly. He just wanted to become a really good electrician. And after months of having to clean up his mess, every day was a challenge. Every day working with this kid was a challenge. And so after months of this, I finally, I said to him, I think you need to reconsider. I want nothing more than for you to be successful, but you've got to get your head out of your ass. And I don't know that you can, I don't think that's really your problem. You're just not cut out for it. So at any rate, now remember, I've got these bullet points. I got these guardrails. I got to get back to the subject, right? I'm sure you don't want to hear about my entire electrical career with apprentices. But point is that, you know, um, teaching is something that I just seem to gravitate towards. And I've been complimented on it from one of my apprentices, and my best friend who I used to work with for a number of years. Um, and from other people as well. Is I just seem to know how to convey how to do things to people, and so with this in mind, it's like, well, so I says this morning. Now I had given up on writing my show notes last night, but this morning is when I produced these notes, and what I says is, well, what if I change this and turn this around to being not just being all anecdotal stories, which really it kind of is. Um, well, I mean, that which I'm actually saying, but not just anecdotal, but also there could be lessons within this. And this is why it's laid out the way it is. My notes, that is, principle one, the show up metric, principle two, the anti-perfectionist anchor, and, principle three, which is the dopamine strategy. I'll get to that in a second. But it was in that moment and changing that, and that I began to understand. So now, if I'm trying to push myself away from the teaching, from lecturing, then and I try to talk about stories that may or may not have any real feeling for me, then it's, and if if it's not going to come out with, coming from my heart, then it's going to feel fraudulent. And that's really the point of this entire 10 minutes of babbling has been about. And, and the evidence, additional evidence to this anti-perfectionist anchor is last week's episode. I talked to Julie about, she started editing, and I'm talking to her about editing. And I says, you can use the AI to remove all the ums and ahs, and you can pick out how many. I suggest you do this and that and the other. And she came back to me at the end of the, as it was time to publish. She'd done all of her editing, and she said to me, I mind you, I can't stand looking back at my recordings and seeing every time I go, because in my head, I know that a confident speaker is a speaker that has very little ums, very little ahs, very little knows. These little things, if you're speaking confidently, there's no stutters, and I just stuttered now. There's no stutters, there's no ums, there's no ahs, or there's very little of any of those things. And a lot of that shows how your mouth moves faster than your brain, or your brain may, in the case of an ADHD mind, which I think we talked about before, but in the case of the ADHD mind, I could be having 4 conversations all at the same time, and what you get is somewhere between those 4 conversations. And that's why you get a lot of ums and ahs, and, because my brain is probably thinking about something other than what I'm actually saying. And this happens a lot. Too much for me to count. So that goes on to say that, I spent a lot of time editing my shows to remove all these things and not have it sound like shit, because, when you're talking and you've got an here and there or whatever, all these things that comes out of your mouth that you don't want, you try to remove it, and it's tied so closely together with something else. It sounds very choppy, and I'm perfectionist. I don't want to hear any of that. I don't want those ums. I don't want those ahs. I want you to think I'm talking confidently. I'm going to edit out all that shit. I mean, there's probably already about 5-6 minutes worth of freaking shit I want Julie to edit out of this episode now. And so at any rate, I give this to her to edit, and this is the reason why, is because of how perfectionist I am. And she said to me, yeah, I barely took out any of that stuff. And I said, what? You're kidding. Why wouldn't you? It's just because that's just how you talk. And I kind of gave in because I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. But if you think about it, you really consider it. And I really considered it. She's right. This podcast is supposed to be authentic. How can I gain your trust? Right? Not that I'm going to abuse your trust, but how can I gain your trust as a podcast host? How can I do that if I'm not being authentic? And my authentic self isn't this super confident guy that talks without ums and ahs or stutters. I mean, I'm confident in a lot of things. It's not to say that I'm weak. I'm confident in a lot of things, but I'm not a super confident speaker. I'm not super confident in all things. That would be fraudulent. So when she said to me she left it all in because that's just the way that I speak and that's just who I am, I had to honestly hand that to her and say, you're absolutely right. And this is why you have to edit it. Because if I do it, I'm going to fucking cut the fucker up. So now let's go ahead and move on to principle 3 then, with all that being said. the dopamine strategy. So now the biological truth, you are not addicted to the work. You are powered by the dopamine hit from the feeling of accomplishment and seeing results. Now, if you work in the trades, I know that this is the case. Having that sense of accomplishment. I mean, I don't know how many times I've had a guy say, yeah, I wired that building, or I built that building. I framed that building. I put that roof on. I did that and it took this long. And I did that and I made all this money. And I did this and I saved a ton of money. And, and I had this many guys on this job and I ran that job and I got this done. And, look at that place, and it's all great because I did, there's your dopamine hit. But, um, you have to fighting the stop fighting the biological need. So now this is the entrepreneur, right? We're not trying to fight against accomplishment and seeing results. So we have to stop fighting the need and instead use it strategically. So the escape artist, me, right, 50 years of escaping, is triggered by the tedious, non-creative work that provides no dopamine and makes the walls close in. It's true. You're doing something over and over and over again. It's the stuff nobody sees. Now to give you some kind of idea what I'm referring to is, part of the product or part of the service that I'm going to provide with my LLC, it has to deal with a spreadsheet. Actually, it has to deal with a database. And but I'm using Google Sheets to create this database, and I'm going through, and I'm not thrilled with the layout. My previous experiences, working with databases and so on prior to being an electrician, is giving me all these feelings of that it's not going to work right. And so I've got all these thoughts going on, and I'm doing this tedious work of making sure that every field is specifically formatted for a specific purpose. And there's so many. There's well over 100. And that's that's a lot it's a lot of formatting, and especially when it's not just a simple change this, change that. It's just multiple steps to each, formatting each one. So, so the escape artist is triggered by this, because at this point, not only am I not getting the dopamine of results because it's just taking forever, I've also got this mental idea that it's not going to work. And so the dopamine catalyst, that is to say, our actionable strategy, is to design work blocks to deliver small and controllable hits. Prioritize the easiest, most concrete action. For example, physically checking off a list, saving a file, sending one key email to generate that micro hit of accomplishment. This uses a small win to fuel the bigger task. So if you're going to spend 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours working on a very repetitive task that has no massive outward, win to it, or there's nothing really, really tangible to it. It really feels like a small win that's taken freaking days to do. Just throw in some moments of getting something else done real quick, and throw together all your little micro wins, all your millimeters, and that'll help you get through that larger, longer task that seems insignificant at the end. it still needs to get done. The significance of it is that it needs to get done. So it may not seem important, it still needs to get done. It's let's see if I can. I mean, I guess a good example is if you ever have to pull data cable and you're pulling that through a ceiling, through an acoustic ceiling, and you've got all these freaking tiles to pull through and everything else like that, and you have a lot of data cable to run. Getting all of your freaking hooks up ahead of time just seems like a really, really, really slow. And, as you're putting up your hooks, you're pulling some freaking string through the ceiling so that you've got a string that goes right through those hooks. And you do all this stuff, and it just seems to take forever to do it because you got to get around all this shit. And it seems very tedious. It seems very, why am I doing this? And then you go to pull a wire, and the wire just goes in like butter. And we'll pull through all that stuff. I mean, honestly, it's these things that seem insignificant, that seem like they're minor to the overall task. It's that create the foundation for the bigger task. And, well, we know if you build a building without a foundation, what will happen to the building, right? So I guess the best way to handle such a tedious task as that is to you get the tiles put back into place after you're done putting up that and pulling the string through and getting that whatever, the fish stick or whatever you're using down to the next tile you got to pull up, or whatever the case is. You can find these little things to mark your wins. It's really kind of hard to draw a line between what I did as an electrician to being an entrepreneur sometimes, because this is building this product, or this part of building the product, the service that I'm going to provide, it really, it doesn't seem to have results. At any rate, um, so the cycle, the escape artist cycle, okay? The journey from electrician to entrepreneur means the old motivation, fear of disappointing a boss, external validation is gone. There's no more external validation. And I think that's a very important lesson, not just for me to learn, but anybody else trying to do this. The work doesn't necessarily carry external validation. Nobody's going to come and pat you on your back for a good work, a good day's work. Nobody's going to, you're not going to see that you managed to wire 10, 20 apartments in a matter of a month or whatever, or a couple of weeks. You can't see that. It's not the same. It's not the same at all. You put in weeks and weeks and weeks, 10 weeks. And where do we count our wins? Where's our external validation? We have to see it. Nobody's going to point it out for us. Nobody's coming to pat us on the back. Right? The external validation is gone. The internal grind, forcing yourself to work, is all that's left. But it inevitably triggers the escape artist, which is sleep, distraction, numbing out. And this really has a lot more for me to do with ADHD than anything else. Is, when you grind, when you work yourself beyond the exhaustion, beyond the pain, beyond all those other things, especially at the age of 50, your body begins to fight back. And not only that, but your frustration levels go through the roof. If you're not living a perfectly healthy lifestyle, which has to be part of this entrepreneurial journey, something that I've got to figure out. but you're not living that perfectly healthy lifestyle. Your body just shuts down a lot faster. Frustration builds up a lot faster. And you look for other ways. You just need to get away from it in order, your hope to get away from it is that when you come back, things will be spurred on even better. Living like living for results for physical or external validation is a great way to keep you lost. Forcing change, grind, also keeps you lost because it creates maximum effort with minimum grace. The outer darkness we spoke of earlier. It creates a heavy load that you carry in my load. All you sick bastards, put that thought away. The hardest truth, the old way I put down, the old way I put down the load was a lot of alcohol. The old way I would escape by drinking a lot. That's how I would find my mental rest. That's how I would be able to stop thinking about whether or not I've gotten as far as I need to get. It's how I would put all those stresses and all those concerns behind me on whether or not I'm good enough, whether or not I'm getting enough done, whether or not, you know, I'm worthy. Drink, 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 drink. The struggle to find rest through presence is the most difficult work of the transformation. This is the lesson. Rest through presence. That is to say, stop thinking about your progress. Give it up. How far you've come so far. Okay. Now, I opened this episode by telling you about the last 10 weeks and how far I've come. And I'll tell you this. Okay. How far I've come in 10 weeks is a nice thing to talk about now that we're at 10 weeks. But over the course of those 10 weeks, I shouldn't have been thinking about how far I've come in this amount of time, because if I sit down and really think about it and I don't mark the wins the way I laid it out for you, instead look at, well, this is where I should be. And I'm glad that I abandoned the original plan for the 90-day exit, because I certainly would be very disappointed by now. And I think that's the important part, is understanding you can't measure it with how much you've done in how much time. You have to just simply show up every day and put some work in. Eventually, if you show up every day and you do something every day, it will get done. And a great line that I heard, and it was one of the, it was probably the most successful project that I ran as a foreman, and I'm on this job, and the guy who I apprenticed under the last 2 years of my apprenticeship, he was a foreman for a lot of the projects that I was on during that time, and taught me a lot about what I knew in terms of running work. And he was on this project. This is the biggest project I'd had to date, and I worried all the time. I had all these guys, and I'm worried that this should be done and that should be done. And I mean, this is what you do when you're running work. Why isn't this getting done faster? Why isn't that? That's what the foreman's role is. Crack the whip, make sure everybody's got everything they need, and to get things done. At least that's what we thought the role was. But at any rate, I would constantly, with all the pressure coming at me from all directions, uh, this gentleman said to me, he says, listen, you put so much energy into worrying about everything every day. You put so much energy into worrying about all these things every day. Did you stop to think that there has never been a job in history that didn't get done? Show up every day, do the best you can. The job will get done. You're worrying so much about being a superstar that you're missing the point, and you're creating all the roadblocks in front of you. It was also the job in which my boss started the job with me and said, "Get the fuck out of the way. You're good enough. Your biggest problem is that you don't believe in yourself. You're good enough. Stop thinking about whether or not you're good enough. Go talk to those guys. Tell them what you want. Tell them what you need. Get the fucking job done. You're good enough." Why, right? It's like I'm back in that moment. And this is why this gentleman is my mentor, is because he was the first person to ever say to me, "What the fuck?" And I've heard, I've been told that, you're a good electrician. You need to stop worrying about that. But, he was the first one to say to me, "Just fucking stop it." So the final commitment is that the grind is the enemy of authenticity. Pushing so hard, looking for perfectionism, thinking that you need to have a certain amount of work done in a certain amount of time. I am committing to prioritizing the heart-driven work and trusting that the structure will follow, showing up every day and getting as much done as I am able to. And if that doesn't look like a lot, I'm not going to pay attention to it. I'm just simply going to say to myself, well, at least I showed up, and at least I did something. The show up metrics promise when you focus on the show up and the next step. What's next? What's next, everyone? You put down the mental load of judgment and create space for rest through presence, the antidote to both the grind and the escape artist. When you focus on the show up and the next step principles, you put down the mental load of judgment and create space for rest through presence. So here's the challenge for all of you. It's the millimeter win challenge, okay? Take the anti-perfectionist tool I've already shown up. So that's job one. What's next? And use it on your most dreaded task this week. Whatever you're up to this week, whatever it is that you're freaking looking at and asking yourself, if only there was a way I didn't have to do that. Apply this principle to doing that. Show up and then ask what's the next thing you need to get done? What's next? Come on, boss, what's next? I did that. Okay, what's next? And then I want you to drop a comment anywhere that you're listening or watching this podcast. Drop a comment and tell me what the task was and what small thing you were able to accomplish after you said, okay, what's next? And with all that being said, I thank you guys once again for showing up every week with me. I'll continue to show up, so I hope that you do. Again, I don't know what next week's episode is going to be about. I think that I'm going to stop trying to tease next week because it certainly seems as though that things just they don't work out the way you think that they will. That you have to have the grace to understand that what best laid plans are not always. It's good to plan things out, but you don't expect them to adhere to them 100% because a lot of times they're just going to freaking pass you by. So all that being said, thank you again. I can't thank you guys enough. Please like, comment, share on any post that you find with this. Hopefully we'll get back to trying to generate some more viewership and get some social media out there. But I hope to see you guys next week with me and continue this journey. I will continue to show up. Please join me. And, remember this. This isn't a comeback. It's a fucking uprising. Have a great week, everybody.